you very much. This week's program, we're going to be talking about those dastardly little things called grass grubs, and they're hitting a crop that you probably wouldn't have expected them to. We're also going to be looking at, I know we've had lots of rain over the whole of the country, but we are going to be looking about how to get the best out of your sheep farming when it is very dry conditions. In just a moment, we're talking wool. John, the season?
The season, yes. When you go back and start from July last year, it's certainly, we've had quite a bit of volatility. I think it's been geared around, well, we saw a New Zealand dollar at 88, for example. Today it's around 74.5, which is quite a movement in that time. So we had the wool price actually peaked. I'm talking for the majority of the clip, which is crossbreds, as we know, which is about 75% of it. The indicator peaked around September, October, and since then it's come down, but it's probably come down about 10%. So it hasn't been so bad. That has happened on the back of more supply hitting the market. And through those months of January, February, March, which are the peak supply months, the market's held up very well, actually. And the recent sale last week was surprisingly strong, in my view. And so that augurs well for the rest of the season. So I think it's been a pretty satisfactory season. New Zealand carpet wools are still in good demand. Obviously, as we've talked about before, we have to compete with other origins all around the world, UK, Middle Eastern, etc., which all have different attributes to New Zealand, which I'm happy to say New Zealand wool, as far as vegetable matter, strength, colour, etc., is still superior, but at the end of the day, it has a price point, and it can only be blended in so much of a percentage-wise to meet that price point. So all in all, I think it's been a satisfactory season, and as I said just before, I think it's the market, if anything, I think will strengthen towards the end of June.
That's pretty good news. Now, you mentioned strengths. We've had a very hot, dry season. Have you had breaks in at all?
Well, it's whenever the animal comes under stress, we know the wool fibre actually is one of the first things that are affected, because it actually stops growing and then starts again. So you get the break, which leads to tenderness, which leads to a lesser value product, if you like. We haven't seen too much of that in the South Island, but there's no doubt there would have been effects. I think the main effect, obviously, will be sheep numbers maybe next year. Capital stock, as you mentioned before. I don't think we've got a real handle on that, but there will be an effect of the drought that we've seen, particularly in the South Island.
Because that's the sheep numbers quietly disappearing. They were low anyway.
They were, but there'll be an extra amount of capital stock that have been killed through this drought period. I think it's safe to say no one really has a real handle on sheep numbers in New Zealand. We think they're around 27, 28 million as we speak. The effect of the drought still has to be seen, in my view, and you'll probably have more of a picture on that next season.
Supply and demand is what you were just talking about. If our sheep numbers drop and they still want that percentage of New Zealand wool, is that going to drive the price up a wee bit?
Well, it should help. Obviously, it should help the price. It's a positive thing, but I'm very wary of forecasting big price rises for New Zealand carpet wools, because, as I say, at the end of the day, even though it's a superior fibre in many ways, which it is, there's no doubt about that, but it still has to compete from, as far as when a manufacturer or a carpet maker or whatever is looking to buy, he still has to compete as well, and he can only ever pay so much for the New Zealand portion of the product that he's trying to make. We've seen gyrations in the past, over the past decade, where New Zealand wool has gone very high, And invariably what it leads to when you get spikes is people going out to other fibres, to man-made fibres, to whatever. And a lot of them never come back. And that's the reality of what happens. And I think we've seen that in the wool industry over the years. So you've got to be very mindful of that fact.
Prince Charles isn't helping much.
I think it's all helping, Rob. Very hard to measure. Very hard to measure. There's a lot of good stuff going on there, but very hard to measure. But as I say, I think when you look back over the last 12 months, I think things are going along pretty well, really, considering all factors.
Are the sheep farmers on hold a wee bit because they've sort of been moved back a bit, and there's a lot of the guys on the plains are doing dairy support or have changed their mode of farming?
Well, I think it's an interesting picture, isn't it, when you think about what's going on in the dairy sector, etc., and obviously dairy is responsible for a lot of the land being lost to sheep. Now, how elastic that is as far as more sheep coming back onto the land is a very interesting question. I would suggest it's not, because of the capital investment that's been made, etc., etc. Meat seems to be holding up pretty well. In response to the price question you gave me before, you know, if we do see returns lift, will that mean more sheep? I'm not sure about that. I don't think there'll be a significant move back to sheep. Because I just fear that land's been lost forever. I don't know what you think about that, but
my thought, seriously, as a positive, is that you cull your worst stock when times are hard. So therefore, what we've got left as a national flock is a very, very good quality flock.
Yes, yeah.
And that's so far as wool as well as meat. So a great base to build out again.
Oh, definitely. I think the biggest question mark in my mind is just what happens to dairy in the next few years.
Yeah. I don't think we'll lose dairying so much. But
But it might.
Dairying support might change.
Correct. That's right. Correct. And so there could be a bit of capacity there for sheep to improve numbers. I think looking out, say, for next season, I don't see any reason for lesser returns. A lot hinges around the currency. I mean, if you see a New Zealand currency at 70 to the US, it will make a difference. At the moment, unfortunately, we're at highs against the euro. We're at 71, or it's been just over 70.
50, didn't it?
Correct. It's been a huge movement, strengthening against the euro, and that certainly has had an effect as far as European businesses are concerned. So what I'm saying is, if that changes significantly, it will certainly affect the NZ cent price for wool. So there's a few, as usual, there's a few things out there that may happen that could be very positive. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
You're referring to carpet. What about mid-micron and fine?
Fine, it's a wee bit out of my expertise, but the fine wool grower, I think, is suffering. He's not getting the returns to justify his investment, if you like. And finer merinos, obviously the weights are less because of
the way, season.
Yeah, or that's the breed. That's the way fine. You usually get finer and less wool weights, so, and it's basically his main source of income. I think the fine merino grower is struggling. The coarser end of the merinos is more positive, around the 19, 20, 21. The half-bred farmers, I think, are having a reasonable year.
Because they were written off at one point.
They were written off by the McKinsey report, probably about 15 years ago.
And his name is still mentioned in hushed tones in the corners of sheds.
McKinsey?
Yeah. Because the McKinsey report just about what it did.
I recommended that they get out of it, do something else. No question about it.
It was proved wrong.
Correct.
John Dawson, thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Pesky little things called grass scrubs are making a name for themselves in an area that you probably wouldn't expect.
Every farmer in the country, especially arable and grass growers, know about the grass scrub. It's one of the few pests in this country that are native to New Zealand. The other one is the piranha moth. All the other things we see on our crops have come in on boats and aeroplanes and the wind. But the grass scrub, for years, hundreds of years actually, has damaged grass through its larvae, its maggots, its underground larvae, by eating the roots. A few years ago, dramatic changes occurred and vineyards in Marlborough started seeing some damage on the vines in November, which they'd never seen before. And it transpired that it was nocturnal damage caused by the adults of the grass scrub, which were emerging from the soil in November, which is spring, and invading vineyards in very, very large numbers. And people were just blown away by this because they'd never seen it before. So lots of science is needed to ask all the questions. Where do they come from? How much damage do they do? Do they eat the flower buds? Yes, they do. And can we do something about it? Doing something about it is easy, actually, in the short term. We spray karate and other broad-spectrum pesticides. We could do that, and that would kill them. But they're tough little devils, and not much does kill them, actually, as adults, because they're covered in wax. So wouldn't it be nice if we don't need to use those broad-spectrum pesticides and use a bit of, you might call it biological agriculture or green agriculture, and attack these bugs, or beetles they are actually, in another way, which is what we're trying to do with a PhD student funded by the government in collaboration with Kono Beverages, who are part of the Wakatu Corporation. And they're extremely helpful to us in doing this work. And he's looking at other ways, he's thinking really deeply. What can we do apart from spraying that can reduce the damage of these damn things?
And do you think you'll have an answer?
We've got an answer already, a partial answer, and that is if we use non-toxic sprays and we're using kaolin, a form of clay, and what's called diatomaceous earths, which are made of the diatoms that used to be in the sea, little bits of silica, it looks like we're reducing damage by half by spraying these innocuous, inert compounds onto the vines in November before the beetles come in.
Now, wetters is another problem in vineyards at the moment.
It is amazing, actually, that just around the same time that grass grubs started hitting vines, this endemic special group of insects called wetter, which have a Talma status for Maori in many cases, and they're rare, started invading vines. Actually, they didn't invade them, they were living there all the time. And another PhD student called Jerry, also funded by the government, is working with Constellation Wines, the biggest wine company in the world, and he's shown that they mainly come up in the spring from under the vines. So they don't fly in, they can't fly anyway, they don't walk in, they're there all the time. And the biggest numbers are in the soil below the vines where they make their burrows. And then they come out of the burrows at night, like the grass scrub does work at night, and they climb the vines, and they chew the leaves a little bit, but most importantly they chew the flower buds. And any viticulturist knows if you lose your flower buds, that's it. So again, we have the challenge of we could use broad-spectrum pesticides, but A, people don't like it, B, they don't work very well, and secondly, because Kono Beverages is a Maori-owned company, they believe, of course, in concepts like kaitiakitanga, and they believe in real stewardship of the land and of the crops. So it would not be a satisfactory solution to spray these vines with pesticide all the time. So Jerry is faced with the same challenge. How can we do it differently? And I'll see you next year. No, that's not true. He again is looking at inert sprays which can deter the wetter possibly without killing it, which is nice, and cut down damage. Also, because Kono Beverages is part of Wakatu, and Wakatu have a seafood component, a massive waste product from Wakatu, of course, is mussel shells, because they grow mussels in the Marble Sound. So instead of dumping those in landfill or something, Kono had the idea is why don't we spread those under the vines where the wetter live and see what happens? So they did that with Jerry's help, and that has had a major impact on the damage at the top of those vines. Maybe the wetter have difficulty getting through the mussel shells, or they come out and go somewhere else. But whatever the mechanisms, it's a very clever idea. And Mauricio, the grass scrub man, has also been using mussel shells for the grass scrub. And again, although they come in sideways and smack into the vines on a November night, something's happening such that when we have mussel shells under the vines, the beetles do less damage. Now we can't understand that. It must mean that after they hit the vine, they go down to lay eggs. And there's all these mussel shells in the way, so they say, oh, I'm not interested in that, and they go somewhere else. But whatever the mechanism, mussel shells and inert sprays seem to be making a difference in both of those vineyards.
Believe me, they will never go away. But after the break, we're going to be talking animal health. I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good. You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
Welcome back to On the Land. Still to come on the program, we're going to be talking about bees. We've got the man from Young Farmers here as well, and we're also going to be giving you a few tips about how you can get through another dry season. I know we've got a wet one right now, but it's a guaranteed thing that we're going to get another dry one. But in just a moment, we'll be talking animal health. Mating soundness in rams.
Yeah, the time is here. Comes around very quickly. So I guess the rams are about to go out, or if they're not already out already, Rob. So I thought it's a good time to talk about ram soundness. So I think the number one point to make, we always think about genitals usually when we're talking about mating soundness, but I think that one of the key factors that's often forgotten is musculoskeletal soundness, and so I think that's very important. If a ram's unable to move freely around, mount the ewes easily, well then obviously the job's not going to get done. And so foot and limb soundness is very, very important and needs to be kept right up the top of the list as far as I'm concerned when it comes to mating soundness. And so foot soundness, foot rot, foot scald, all those normal sort of problems. If you've got some ageing rams, arthritic issues, joint problems, if there's been any trauma, as can happen with rams, they're all very important factors. And to be honest, sadly, they may be what's induced in making the decision to cull a ram from a ram flock.
Because you do forget about them. You put them in the paddock, don't you, and leave them there.
Absolutely, and when the job needs to be done, you need to know that they're going to be able to do the job before they go out. It's no good just chucking them out there without having a look beforehand. So, yeah, as I say, we may be a little bit slow off the mark talking about it right now, but it is a pertinent topic. So musculoskeletal soundness and having a sound animal that can move freely is obviously very, very important.
Yep. What other things are? I mean, there's diseases and things that they can pick up.
Absolutely. So I think, again, we'll move down into the nitty-gritty areas, if you like, of the scrotum and things. Woolly scrotums, another simple thing that needs to be addressed. Obviously, if we've got lines of rams that are prone to growing a lot of wool on the scrotum, that needs to be dealt with, and probably I'd advocate maybe looking at another line of rams. So genetics can play a factor there. Obviously, wool over the scrotum is going to overheat the scrotum, and we can end up with testicular atrophy, so the testicle just not being able to produce viable sperm cells because it's overheated. So that's an important factor. The other big disease that causes overheating is a parasitic problem, a mange, so a little mite that infects the skin of the scrotum. It's called scrotal mange. It involves the skin getting really thick and thickened and covered in scabs, and that again results in overheating. So all these things should be checked, and usually should be involving a veterinary surgeon before the rams are due to go out. And scrotal mange can be a bit of a problem to eradicate, but it can be done, and so with good advice and a correct diagnosis, these sort of things can be sorted out.
Do you think about parasites and internal parasites and things?
Internal parasites are important to maintain the overall health and welfare of the ram and keep them in tip-top order. But as far as specific issues regarding fertility, they're probably less involved, apart from the little mite that I just talked about that causes scrotal mange. Perhaps the biggest and most documented problem is brucella. That's a bacterial disease. It's actually transmitted through sodomy, so rams do sodomise each other when they're coming up to the mating season, and that's the major transmission mechanism of the disease. That again usually needs a veterinary surgeon to diagnose. It can be felt in a certain part of the scrotal contents, the epididymis, so the vet will be able to feel a lesion there and alert the vet that maybe there's a problem there. There's a very, very good scheme run. It's compulsory for all stud breeders. It's an elective procedure for commercial farmers. That involves a testing and certification system. So you should, if you're buying from a stud ram breeder, you should be able to look at a brucella ovis certificate to ensure that breeder is clean. So we're sure that the disease isn't being passed through infected rams. Can be a real problem to eradicate, and again needs professional advice if we're going to do that. But of course, just like all of these problems, the first step is actually getting the diagnosis, and that's going to be involving your veterinary surgeon and probably just having them look at these rams before they're required. So
Better that the vet gets the living daylights kicked out of him than the farmer anyway.
It's a skill, I can tell you. Yeah, it's a skill. When you're palpating rams, yeah, you soon learn not to leave one alone behind you in the race. That's for sure. Yeah, otherwise it's more than the rams that get palpable testicular lesions.
I don't know if we're going to quietly move on. Pistol rot is another thing which rears its ugly head.
Pizzle rot is another problem, and of course if we've got an infected ulcerated pizzle, that can also involve the penis. We can obviously, it doesn't take a genius to realise that it can affect the business end of mating. Pizzle rot is an interesting disease. It's generally seen when rams are being fed quite a high protein diet. So if we're talking about lucerne or possibly green feed to try and up condition or flush rams into a good state of fertility, that's when we can see it. So with these high protein feeds, we get a lot of urea produced in the urine. It's a byproduct of protein metabolism, and there's a particular bacteria, Corynebacterium renale it's called, and that splits urea into ammonia and another product. And the ammonia, of course, is caustic and it burns, and so a lot of the lesions around the pizzle are actually ulcers, and that's through alkaline burns from the ammonia that's produced by this bacteria. Easily fixed with some antibiotics, but it's something to be very aware of, particularly if you are supplementing green feed or lucerne in particular when you're feeding rams coming up to mating. So very, very important to.
Because I guess guys try to flush.
Absolutely, and that's the right thing to do, but it is something to be very aware of and make sure that you've got an eye kept on that situation. The other big problem associated with concentrate feeding, particularly grains, is we have quite high mineral contents in some of these feedstuffs, and it can result in stones, and actually bladder stones forming in the ram that can cause urethral obstruction, and actually that can actually be the end of a breeding animal very quickly if the urethra becomes obstructed. So concentrate feeding, very, very important to promote good access to water and dilute urine. And again, maybe it's something that could be discussed with a veterinary surgeon if you're looking at those sort of feeding regimes.
People still use teaser rams?
They do, and they're very good at bringing a lot of ewes or two-tooths or hoggets, now that this hogget mating is becoming more important, into season at the same time, so we get a more concentrated lambing pattern. They're very, very easy to create, teasers. It's a bit of a pretty small little surgical procedure. It does require a veterinary surgeon to do it. Needs to be done well in advance, because obviously
we don't empty the magazine.
Absolutely, we don't want any wigglers in the pipe, so to speak, when that happens. They're very easy to pick up. One thing that should be noted with teasers is that if you are getting the flock checked for brucellosis, you will get quite a distinctive lesion that can be felt in the scrotal contents that could be confused with a brucella lesion. So it's important to, unless you want to test the vet out, of course, it's important to tell the vet attending the flock at that time that these animals are teasers, because otherwise he'll be starting to get a worried look on his face when
and there will be some who will tempt it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Now, if you want to check up on anything that he said because you didn't quite catch it, don't forget his interview is on www.ontheland.co.nz. I'll be back with more on the land straight after the break. I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good. You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
Welcome back to On the Land, the program that's not only on your television set, but it's on any screen, anywhere, anytime. And in just a moment, we'll be talking bees and federated farmers. Barry, the season, been an interesting one, as they would say.
Yeah, it has been indeed. The springtime started off with a bit of up and down weather, and we were feeding hives till quite late into late November and early December, which is usually doesn't happen. But and then the honey flow in the Canterbury region started with a hiss and a roar, really, because of that change in hot weather that we got, and they started bringing it in really fast. But when it came to that January period, when it became too dry, we were looking for a big rain, but it never happened. So
a lot of people were looking for that big rain.
Yeah, absolutely. So our season has been average, but it's been better than the last couple of years. So which is good from our point of view. But nationally, the honey crop has been pretty much just average, with a few areas that have been done quite well, probably above average. But then there's quite a few areas, like especially down south and South Canterbury and stuff like that, where it was real dry. Some of those guys got basically nothing. So, which is pretty hard to deal with.
Well, it makes it impossible, because you've still got expenses.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so some of those guys down there were feeding hives in probably late January, early February, where they probably shouldn't be feeding until late February at the earliest. So, and it's just it takes a lot for those guys to get back on track again. They really need a good season next year to make up for this one. But
you still got to carry it. You still got your provisional
right,
tax.
yeah.
You've still got
absolutely.
And sugar. You guys buy sugar by the ton.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, especially in where we beekeep in the Canterbury Plains, it's you need to feed. So we feed from sort of August right through till we always like to sort of finish around Christchurch show, depending on when.
Which is November for those who don't
yeah. But this season it's gone on a bit longer, so we've probably fed a bit more sugar than we have done in the past. But yeah, it's a necessity of life to keep them going.
I mean, 60 or 70 tonnes of sugar is a lot of sugar. You mix it up into a slurry?
Yeah, we do, yeah. So it's basically 50-50 mixture with water. So we have a mixing tank that that holds about 1,500 litres. We fill it half with water, and then we buy the sugar by 1 tonne bags, and we just tip a whole 1 tonne bag in.
I mean, we buy it by the sort of the small packet. Is it an industrial sugar, or is it the sort of stuff you would put in your coffee?
Yeah, it is. Some of the stuff that we buy is a manufacturing sugar, so that's what all the other industry
like cakes
and stuff like that. So that's what we are using. You can buy the A1 grade sugar, which is what they sell in the supermarkets and stuff like that, but it's a little bit more expensive. So that's what we use.
It would be very much more expensive.
Yeah.
So, prices. You were saying that some people just literally haven't made ends meet this year.
Yeah, the honey prices of New Zealand honey has still got a very strong demand for it overseas, especially in China and in the Asian countries, which is keeping the price up tremendously. Lots of clover honey that we produce, it's sort of gone up 20 to 30% in price, bulk price, since last year. So which is quite a good gain. But the Manuka honey and the UMF honeys and stuff like that, I mean, that's gone up. We've just bought some recently for a client, and we're paying probably about $7 a jar more than we were last year, and that's for a 500 gram jar. So yeah, it's going to be, but the demand is still there for it from the customers overseas. So I don't know.
Are we not big honey consumers in New Zealand?
We are, but I think that is declining a little bit because of the prices that we're getting for export prices overseas. I know for the price that we get for our domestic product that we sell in the supermarkets locally is quite a bit less than what I can sell it for in a bulk drum to another honey packer to sell overseas. So
yeah, I see what you
which
mean.
becomes very interesting.
I guess a lot of people who have got bees have been relying for pollination as far as income is concerned.
Yeah, that's right. And with pollination for next season, because of the honey prices or where they are, there's a lot of beekeepers are next season thinking more seriously about chasing the honey production side of things because of the honey price. So the farmers that grow small seeds and kiwi fruit and all those crops that need bees, they need to be proactive in talking to their beekeeper to make sure that they're going to have some beekeepers to bring some hives in next year. I've talked to a couple of beekeepers that are sort of one-man operations, and they do quite a bit of pollination, and they're basically going to pull the pin because of the honey prices that they've been getting this year. And these two people I've been talking to have had quite a good season in honey production, so that's where they think they can go.
Are you suggesting that if you're doing pollination that you don't get as much honey, or?
Yeah, but that's right, yeah. In the crops in our business that we pollinate, especially the carrot seed, we're putting 8 hives to the hectare in there, which is you're basically overpopulating an area or a food source for them. And especially the carrots, they don't. It has a very short window of when it yields. So some farmers and agents that you talk to say that it only sort of yields at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon when the ground temperature gets to sort of over 20 or 21 degrees. So it's a very short space of time during the day that they have the chance to gather nectar off that plant. Some other crops are a little bit better than that for yielding and stuff like that, but yeah, it's very interesting.
It's a subject that not many people would actually think about. You know, they go and buy a jar of honey and they know that there's bees everywhere, but it's a science.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And it takes a lot of work to get a jar of honey as well, from start to finish. So it's beekeeping is very labour intensive, and it is indeed.
How are you getting on with the reunification, or the unification, I should say, of the whole industry?
Yeah, it's moving along very slowly, but I think we're making progress. It'll be. We had a survey that went out to all of the beekeepers throughout New Zealand, and there was a pretty, I would suggest it's a pretty poor response back from it, but it went out to 5,000 beekeepers, but they only had about 700 responses back. But out of those 5,000, there's probably 700 to 800 that are like commercial operations. So it's a bit of an unknown as to what ratio there was from the feedback that they came back. But there'll be a report about what their findings were at conference, which is in the end of June this year in Taupo. So
Sounds as though someone's going to do a lot of phone calling.
yeah.
Barry, thank you very much indeed. Now, we've been talking about the dry spell as far as how it's reacted to bees, but it's also reacted to every other type of farming, and Tony Bywater has got some ideas about how to farm through extreme droughts.
Obviously, we've been through a very dry period this year, but hopefully it's coming right now. A while ago, I was making comments about how farmers need to be planning for the longer term, and what I'm really talking about is how the system is set up to be resilient to variations in the environment. And Beef and Lamb right now have got a workshop going around the country talking about resilience. So what we mean by resilient systems are those that are able to handle variability in their environment and still produce a good productivity and profitability from the operation. So resilient systems have those sorts of characteristics.
It's logical. So what are we looking at?
What are we looking at? Obviously, on the east coast of both islands, most of the sheep and beef are on dry land, okay, or in hill country, whatever. The real issue there is if and when things go dry. And it's quite interesting. If you look at the NIWA data, and you can go back about 30 years, for example, we did this at Hororata a couple of years ago, and the average rainfall is between 60 and 80 millimetres a month, every month of the year. We say it's a summer dry environment, but the January rainfall's not really different from the August one. The real issue is how variable it is. And you've got huge variability in midsummer and in winter, surprisingly, and much less variability in spring and autumn. So it's handling that variability that's the real issue. And I think we would argue that there's 3 or 4 things that farmers need to be doing to handle that variability and get high productivity every year. The first one is that the faster you can grow your lambs or your cattle, the more flexibility you've got to handle that variability. So that comes down to feed quality. You really need to have feed that's 11.5 megajoules or more throughout the growing season. Now, as soon as it gets dry, that's going to drop. We accept that. But you've got to keep it at that level while it's actively growing. And you've got to be aiming for at least 300 grams a day, birth to sale, on your lambs. And if you're not getting that, you need to be looking at that feed quality. A couple of ways of doing that. Obviously, there are high nutritive value species around, lucerne, the herbs, plantain, chicory, etc., that will give you that high quality. And they maintain their quality better if they're not grazed absolutely correctly. The problem with them generally is low winter growth, and they are a bit more complicated and they are a bit more costly than traditional conventional pasture systems. So on conventional pasture systems, you really got to have a high stocking rate in order to keep those pastures growing actively and keep the quality up. So those are your choices.
Another option?
The problem, of course, with a high stocking rate is that you then increase the risk, the consequences of running out of feed. So the second thing that you've really got to have is flexibility to change your stocking rate quickly. If we're talking about resilient systems that are going to operate well in good years as well as bad years, because sometimes with low stocking rates, pasture quality deteriorates in good years and farmers sort of almost guarantee poor performance. So if we're going to guarantee good performance in good years as well, you've got to have high stocking rates. And that means stocking to above average conditions, but with the flexibility to retreat from that quickly when you need to. Flexible stock classes, older cattle, the cull ewes that are destined to leave the farm, you can mate them earlier so that they can be sold earlier if necessary. So there's various options in terms of flexible stock classes. The third point then is if you've got a high stocking rate, you've got flexibility to change that stocking rate quickly, when do you actually do it? And what we did at Silverwood, if you remember, Rob, a few years ago, we monitored soil moisture. And as soon as soil moisture got down to a level where we thought it was too dry to continue, we started selling stock. So we had an environmental monitor that triggered a destocking on that property. So it's those three key points: high pasture quality and high lamb growth rates, high stocking rates and the flexibility to move quickly, and then a trigger that tells you that you've got to do it. Obviously, sometimes if you react to the trigger, it's getting dry, and then 3 or 4 weeks later it starts raining again, you probably won't make as much money as you would have done if you'd have hung on. That's gambling. That's not risk management. So if we're going to have high productivity year after year, you need to be responding to that trigger.
Indeed, some very good advice there from Tony. And if you just wanted to recap on any of that or check up on it, don't forget it is on our website, ontheland.co.nz. Straight after the break, we're talking about the younger people in farming. I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good. You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
Welcome back to On the Land. Now, farming is a thing that a lot of people haven't thought as sexy for quite some time. I'm talking young people. In just a moment, we'll find out what's being done to change that. It's an old organisation that's being really brought back into some vigorous life.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, New Zealand Young Farmers first started in 1932, so we've got some real heritage on our side. And it was set up more than anything else as a social network to connect people. You can imagine back, 80 odd years ago, communication wasn't very strong. Your nearest neighbour might have been 10 k's up the road.
And
so
you're in the grips of a depression.
Absolutely. So actually connecting people together was very important for all sorts of social reasons and some development reasons. And that hasn't really changed, but the way we do it's slightly different.
So what are you doing? Because there is a huge void of young people in farming.
Yes, and with the average age of farmers being in the 50s now, there's going to be a bit of a problem in the next decade or two. So we're working really hard to try and bring in a lot more young people that wouldn't have thought of farming or the primary industry as a career option. So, you know, a generation ago, everyone was related or knew a farmer. But in this day and age, actually, there's a real disconnect. A lot of city people have no connection to farming whatsoever, and that's a concern.
The only connection they have is on the land.
Yes, that's right, exactly right. So what we're trying to do is we've got a whole lot of programs now with schools. So probably the biggest development Young Farmers did as an organisation 5 years ago was to actually start a teen ag, so a junior young farmers division, if you like, and have clubs in secondary schools. And to date, we're in just under 80 schools. And we've got a goal of getting to 200 high schools by, within the next couple of years.
So what are the schools doing? I mean, young farmers you would think of as somebody who work on a farm and go to a meeting once a month or whatever and have a couple of jugs and that's it.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the issues for us as an organisation is that New Zealand Young Farmers as a name doesn't necessarily reflect what we do. So the whole primary industry these days isn't just about being on farm or in processor, but the actual career options for people in the industry is very wide. So it's agribusiness, the science attributes, the marketing attributes that we actually need to take New Zealand Inc. and its products overseas. You know, if you want to be an engineer, brilliant. Go to school, do well, go and do an engineering degree. But there's loads of jobs within primary industry. You go and work for Fonterra or one of the meat companies, and there's some pretty challenging roles with high pay packets.
And we're going niche by the day, aren't we?
Absolutely. You know, the whole talk of value add to our commodity-based primary industry economy is more and more relevant. Small players doing some really interesting things that need skilled, vibrant young people coming in to do these things.
So you don't have to be a farmer to be a young farmer?
Absolutely right.
So how do people find it? Obviously you've got a website of some sort.
Yeah, and obviously through our events that we do around the country, we're very much a community-based organisation. So we divide the country into 7 regions and 25 districts across the country. And we get out and actually just make sure that people know what we're doing actually in the community, whether it's at AMP showgrounds, whether we do events in city halls, and we do that around the country as well through our career advice evenings and days. A lot of active stuff in community is probably how we get our word out the most.
Terry, there must be people who watch the young farmers at AMP shows building fences and goodness knows what. There would be some who would go, I don't want to be a member of Young Farmers because I don't know how to build a fence. So you're catering for those who don't want to do the competitions and who don't want to put...
So the typical New Zealand Young Farmers Club has 3 kinds of member. There's those that literally just want to connect with people who think and act like they do in a social atmosphere. So it's a club. And you catch up with your mates and you have a good time. And you might do the odd event or the
very social
activity. Absolutely. And if that's all you want to do, brilliant. We provide a network and an organisation for you to have some fun. And by default, by turning up, you actually do learn some stuff. Yeah. But you might not focus on that. The second thing is those that want to enter our competitions to sort of better themselves and benchmark themselves against everybody else. You know, those that want to show to employers, actually, I'm the guy that can probably do the most for you. And they're out there doing it. And the third part is those that want to be future rural leaders, and they're the ones that we're sort of starting to shape now into leadership development programs, so that the next directors of Dairy NZ or the next provincial presidents of Federated Farmers have actually got some really good grounding before they get to that age where they think, hell, I need some skills in this area or some experience.
So there's a lot of learning as well as sampling wines.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's still a major part of it. Tell me about your contest, because you're halfway through the season for your Young Farmers Club.
Yep. So this year it's the 12th year that it's the ANZ involvement. Initially through National Bank brand, but now through ANZ. So the ANZ Young Farmer Contest. It's gone really well. We've had 6 of our 7 regional finals so far. So the last one's this coming weekend up in Dargaville. But it's been a really successful season. The calibre of people coming through and competing has been absolutely brilliant. One of our best years, I think, in terms of the ability of these people. It's a real combination of some first-time grand finalists, so those that win their regional final go through to the national final, which will be in Taupo in July. Some of those people are first-timers, some are second-timers. You can only compete in grand final twice. And of course, if you win it, that's it. And yeah, really strong standard. And they're being tested on such a range of things. I mean, the contest isn't all about being big and strong and building fences or shifting hay bales or whatever it might be. There's an academic element, there's a business case, a marketing thing with HR strategies to do at the grand final. There's a whole lot of skills modules. There's general knowledge and agricultural knowledge being tested, as well as a sort of a decathlon type event where you compete head to head with your fellow competitors, and it might take 45 minutes to do this grueling set of physical challenges.
Ooh, so to get that cloak of knowledge.
Yes, you're really someone. You've really got a complete package.
Yeah. What's the age limit as far as young farmers are concerned?
Yeah, currently 31. We have this terrible term that we call ageing out, which I really want to banish.
I think so, actually. I'd go with you on that one.
Yeah, so currently it's 31. That those sorts of things about our membership get reviewed. So historically, that was probably quite appropriate. That you sort of, when you finish at 30, but in your year that you've turned 30, you might still have your membership year carry over. So that's why we've made it 31. At some point in time, we might raise that to 35. That's sort of work in progress.
But then they can join things like Federated Farmers or Rural Women or...
Yes, absolutely. And, there's, in the last sort of 6 months or so, there's been a real growing of the relationship between us and Federated Farmers, which is really, really positive. Hasn't always been the case in history.
But it's a natural flow through.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? You'd think there'd be logic there. But there's been a bit of water that's flowed under the bridge between the two organisations, 2 new CEOs, for example, which they actually get on with each other, which is very helpful. And we actually are starting to see the real benefits at both ends of the equation for having a sort of an alignment.
Exactly. Very briefly, international people who are here for a short time.
Yeah, migrant workers. It's as we all know, that's a big chunk of our industry. Certain parts of the country, like Southland, for example, has quite a large amount of Filipino workers, for example, who come in and work during the season. We welcome those in young farmer clubs, absolutely. We've got to make sure that we have some sort of cultural understanding of what they need to feel comfortable. Language barriers as such are only one issue, and the length of time that they're here. So to build those relationships, sometimes it takes a bit more than a season to get there. So we're working on that.
I'm sure you will. And thank you very much indeed, and all power to your elbow, because the future of farming is actually in your hands.
Thank you very much.
Now, once again, if you want to catch up with anything that's been said on the program, www.ontheland.co.nz. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed On the Land, but you can go and check it on the website. Bye now.